Part of your compensation for work injury is medical care, and often with serious injuries, my clients may need medical care long into the future after a settlement. So we need to make sure that the settlement includes potential future medical needs. Now, sometimes that involves creating or establishing what's called an MSA, a medical set-aside account. What are they? And what should you do about them if they're proposed in your settlement? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, everyone. My name is Morrell. I'm an attorney with the law firm Kaplan Morrell. We've been helping injured and disabled workers and their families get the benefits they deserve for work injuries in Colorado since 1997. Please, if we can help you, feel free to contact us. And if this video is helpful to you, please like and subscribe. And with that, let's jump into it. So let's talk about a now very routine part of settlements and workers' compensation claims, how to handle your future medical needs. They're called MSAs, medical set-aside accounts, and we're going to talk about why they exist, how they're created, and what kinds there are. And finally, at the end, I'm going to let you know 3 things that I try to have included in every MSA. Part 1, why MSAs exist. It used to be injured workers could settle their work injury claims and spend the money however they wanted and figure out, hey, health insurance is going to pay for my future medical needs, Medicaid's going to pay for it. I get to spend all this money, even though part of this money I got because I have future medical needs. Well, didn't take long for the government to get wise to the fact that insurance companies were kind of shifting their obligation to pay for medical benefits in the future, and they were shifting them to the government, which is kind of running out of money. So Congress and the executive overhauled the rules about how settlements in work injury cases, personal injury cases happen so that Medicaid, Medicare aren't left holding the bag. So when you settle a work injury claim or any other kind of personal injury claim, the settlement has to take into account how much of that settlement is for your future medical needs. Depending on your situation, the amount of the settlement and your future medical needs, that MSA can look very, very different. Number 2, how informal MSAs are created. So there are 2 ways an MSA can be created. The first is an informal route, and it's possible to do this if the settlement doesn't exceed a certain dollar amount and the injured worker is not on Medicaid or Medicare or not likely to be on these programs anytime soon. In that case, it's possible for the parties just to come up with a reasonable amount of the settlement that is earmarked for future medical benefits. The important distinction is that the injured worker controls the money. So if you settle, for example, for $35,000, $5,000 is for future medical needs. You're not required to spend it on medical care. And it's highly unlikely that Medicare or any other insurance program is ever going to ask you for an accounting of that money. As long as you aren't asking Medicare or Medicaid or sometimes even your health insurance to pay for medical care related to your work injury, then no one's ever going to ask, hey, what happened to that $5,000 from that $35,000 settlement? And as time goes on, the more and more time that passes between you settling and finally needing medical care for that body part, the less likely anybody's going to ask. So that's the informal MSA. You control the money, you get it, nobody's going to ask you to account for it, nobody's going to ask you where it went. Chances are. The second kind of MSA is what we call a formal MSA, and that typically is required when the settlement amount is higher and when the person is either already on Medicare or likely to be on Medicare because, for example, they have requested or applied for Social Security disability, or maybe they're on Medicare because they're already on Social Security because of their age. In those cases, depending on the settlement, there may be required what's called a formal MSA. And what does that involve? It involves getting all of your medical records for the last 2 years and evaluating what are the doctors saying, what are the doctors recommending, what's the diagnosis, what kind of treatment have you had in the past, what is the doctor saying you might need in the future. And what happens is the insurance company typically creates a proposal to Medicare. It's called CMS, Centers for Medicare Services. And they say, here's this person's medical records. Here's what the doctors are saying. Here's the diagnosis. here's our estimate of that person's future medical needs. And CMS is going to review it, and they're going to say one of two things. They almost never say it's too much. They'll say either A, we agree, or they're going to say, we don't agree, it needs to be this amount, right? You said 100,000, we think it needs about 150,000, okay? And if they come up with a higher amount, the insurance company has to decide, do we want to settle anyway by coming up with that amount? Most often they do, but not always, okay? Now, what's the importance of CMS signing off on the proposal? The importance is basically if you're on Medicare and you exhaust the money is, it was put into account and now that account is at zero and you still need medical care for your work injury because CMS reviewed it, because they agreed with the proposal or they set a different amount that was eventually funded, Medicare will then pick up the treatment from there on. And that is what's called a formal MSA, but they're very, very complicated to get. That's why there's these proposals. And number two, there's a lot of things that you need to do if you have an MSA. For example, you have to put it in a separate account. That account has to be interest bearing. You have to keep track of where you're spending the money. You have to save the receipts. You have to file reports, etc. So there's a lot of burden on the injured worker on dealing with a formal MSA. That's why sometimes or often insurance companies and injured workers will agree on what's called a professionally administered MSA. There are other companies out there which help injured worker administer their MSA. And that means they take care to make sure it's in a proper account. They make sure that the record keeping is proper. They make sure there are receipts. They fill out the reports that's to send to CMS. If CMS or Medicare wants to know, hey, what's going on with that money, they'll answer it. They've got everything. They've checked all the boxes, crossed the T's, dotted the I's to make sure all the paperwork requirements are correct. That's a huge advantage to having a claim your MSA professionally administered. They also do a lot of other things, which is to get you to doctors who are willing to work with you, who charge less than going rates for somebody just walking off the street. So you maximize your MSA. Now, how are MSAs funded? Typically what happens is whatever the dollar amount is, 20% goes in year one. And then the insurance company will then buy an annuity which deposits into that account a certain amount of money every year. So for example, you might have a $100,000 MSA. They're going to deposit $20,000 of that into the account year one, and then every year thereafter, they'll put in, let's say in my example, $2,000 for 40 years, okay? So the $20,000 goes into the account and it starts earning interest. You get medical care, you give your little card because you've got a professionally administered account. The doctor takes it, charges the custodian, the professional administrator, they send out the money to pay the bill. More interest, a few more bills. Next year, more money deposited in, more interest, more bills. And hopefully you're able to maximize that amount to get the care that you need without needing to go to Medicare. But the good thing is, again, in a formal MSA that's professionally administered, if you reach that zero, if you reach bottom on that account, again, because CMS has approved it, Medicare is agreeing to pay for the treatment that you need for the rest of the year. Then come new year, new $2,000 is deposited, and we're back again, bills, interest, etc., until the account hits zero. And what I look for in MSAs is how's it being funded? I need to make sure there's enough money going into it immediately so that you've got a good cushion. Number two, is it professionally administered? Third thing I look for is what happens to the money if you die and there's still money in there. Now, often what I would try to do is get that money to go to your beneficiaries, your estate, your heirs. Often, though, insurance companies say, no, we have what's called a right of reversion, which means, look, this money was for medical care. If he's dead, he's not getting medical care. We wouldn't have paid for it anyway. And so therefore, if there's any money left over in this MSA, when he dies, it comes back to the insurance company. But those are things to look at. As always, if you are looking at a settlement where you need an MSA, you've got to have an attorney who knows how to look at these, knows how to evaluate them, argue for more. And the other thing that's really important is not all of your future medical needs go into an MSA. There are certain medical treatments that Medicare doesn't pay for. That won't go into an MSA. You need to make sure that your settlement includes not just what Medicare might have to pay for in the future, but also the medical care that Medicare won't pay for should also be included in your settlement. And with that, I'm hopeful that this has been helpful to you. If it has, please like and subscribe. And with that, thank you so much for spending part of your day with me.